Yesterday, we reported to you that the Russians had opened a new front in the Russia-Ukraine war near the area of Kharkiv, up north of that city. And at the time, there was lots of fireworks, lots of troops attacking in numerous places, but we didn't have a lot of information. Now that we're about 24 hours into this, I want to bring you some updates we have and some new questions that we have too. Because it's not clear yet exactly what Russia's intentions are. There are a lot of what appears to be contradictory information. And if we know anything about the Russians, they're not going to be open about what they're doing. So we're going to try to put this piece this all together, as we always do here at Deep Dive, as to give you the full range of what we know so far, and to give you a good estimate of what may be coming next. So the first thing I want to do is kind of bring up a map here for the Institute for the Study of War to show you kind of what's going on, so you know where we're talking about here. The area on the right there is in the red. That's where Russia has been for the better part of really the whole war, almost from the beginning. They've had most of that territory there. The green circles are where the recent fighting has been going on and the heaviest battles. But then you see in the center upper left there where the Kharkiv city is circled, and you have these two new green spots there. One by an area called Volvansk, and then the other one is really not by any major city, but it's just almost directly north of Kharkiv city. That's where the two entry points are so far. And what we have seen from some German sources is that up to this point, despite the claims by the Ukraine side that they blunted all of the attacks and it's almost implying that it's over, Russia has penetrated about 15 kilometers across. Those two areas there represent about 15-kilometer width, and they have penetrated up to 5 kilometers deep. So in 24 hours, they've been able to penetrate 5 kilometers into the Ukraine side into their territory. And they have it sounds a little more impressive than it is, but they've taken about 12 villages, little small areas, under their control. That's a little deceptive because some of these villages are literally little more than a couple of streets, but they have a name on a map, so they qualify as a village. But that's not what they're fighting for. And in fact, it's not yet clear what Russia's actual objective is, because some of the interesting things right off the bat is that there have been reports that Russia could have anywhere from 50 to 70,000 troops stockpiled up around the northern area there on the Russian side of the border. But by all accounts, so far, there's been a surprisingly small number of Russian troops involved so far, potentially as few as 2,000. Just a few battalions have so far been making this operation. They've had armor, they have infantry assaults, and as I said, they've had some success. The Ukraine side is certainly doing their best to try and stop this. But there have been, from some Ukrainian sources, another interesting thing. You're not going to see this in any of the Western media, at least none that I've seen so far. But the Ukraine media has reported that there has been some problems within the ranks, that in the initial group that were up on the border, many of them ran as soon as they saw the Russians, which is probably why Russia was able to get 5 kilometers deep before reinforcements were sent back up from the south, and the Ukrainian reinforcements back up to bolster the line. And at the moment, that's where it is kind of stuck. Now, I think some of these scenes you're seeing right now are from Volvansk. The city that was kind of on the right-hand side of that map, and that's kind of where some of the fighting has been going on up to. This town, Volvansk, is about 3 miles, from the border, and that seems to be one of the initial objectives of the Russians on the right side. In fact, we have Weeb Union who's going to show his initial estimates of what he thinks may be going on.
It is becoming clear that in the northeastern direction, the Russians are looking to gain control over this area right here, connecting all the way up to Vovchansk and then down to the Russian border. This will create a small bulge, after which they will look to gain control over the area here to the northeast of Kharkiv city itself. And they would like to look to gain control over Vesele as well, here connecting this road to the major forest patches here to the west of the Russian positions by Vovchansk, and possibly explain it to connect all of this into one large bulge. And then they'll be moving in western and eastern directions to expand it along the borderline.
Now, at least so far, this is starting to give evidence that Putin is making good on something that he said in March, actually, that he wanted to create a buffer zone. Because, Gary, if you could put that map, that ISW map back up there again, you can see there in the above the Ukrainian border there, it says the Belgorod Oblast. Just a little bit farther north of that is the Belgorod city, and Ukraine has been attacking that consistently for quite a long time. I think well over a year, but more so in recent days. And Belgorod city is a point of military communication lines, rail lines, road networks, and stuff that where they use to move a lot of their supplies and their troops around here and there on their side of the border. And it's apparently becoming quite a nuisance. So aside from the fact that the Russian people are upset at their leadership, that they want him to do something to stop some of that. So at least the initial implication seems to be that that Russia wants to push Ukraine further back so that they're out of artillery range. Right up above the Belgorod's about 20 kilometers from the border. And so that's kind of at the outer reach of a lot of the Ukrainian artillery pieces. So they have to get right up toward the border to be able to reach that far into Russia. By having this buffer where Russia could push Ukraine back maybe 10 to 15 to 20 kilometers, that would move them out of range for most of their weapon systems in Belgorod. They would not be able to attack. So that seems to be one of the early initial intents. But like I said, it's a little puzzling that so far Russia has only used about 2,000 troops. Now, what that tells me as a former cavalry officer is that it sounds like a reconnaissance in force. And that means that you have the larger force behind you, and then you'll send in cavalry units, what we would call cavalry units, reconnaissance units by others, where they would develop the situation. They would have the initial penetrations, the initial contacts, and then hand off the battle once they have developed the situation to find out where the defenses are strong, where they're weak, where they can go in, and then the heavier forces would then come in for the big attack. Now, if Russia truly does have 50 to 70,000 troops in the area, that implies that they still have large numbers of forces available to come in later. But it's also possible that this is just a diversionary attack. It could be that Russia wants the Ukraine side to move reinforcements into this area so that they're not available elsewhere. And Gary, no, actually, I've got another map here I can show you on my own. Don't have to ask Gary for this one. Now this map I'm about to show you here is from a Ukraine source. So you'll have to forgive me because the words are in Russian and not in English. But this right here is Belgorod. That's the Russian city that the Ukraine has been attacking. This is Kharkiv here. And one of these analysts on the Ukraine side has already pointed out that these yellow arrows here are Ukraine troops that may be repositioned to go and try to take, especially if Russia continues to move down south and threatens Kharkiv, then they have additional reinforcements. These right here, this arrow right here appears to be the ones that were moving south and then continued on up north to try and stop the initial invasion force right here that's already gone up there, a couple of elements of two different brigades. And these are speculated some more that if Russia continues to move down to these other spots here, then more reinforcements could come from here, which, as you can see from all these Russian icons, all these little icons here are Russian units of various sizes that are already operating in the Kupiansk area. You may have heard about that. They then could potentially, because there's also reports that there have been upwards of 100,000 additional Russian soldiers in this area that have not been in contact, that have been available for any kind of a penetration that may come anywhere along the line. If Ukraine moves enough troops up here because they're threatened around Kharkiv, then that makes this a much more vulnerable, and Russia could potentially push in even further in here. Or alternatively, Russia could be trying to hold the Ukrainian troops in the north here, get reinforcements to go up to this area, but then actually instead of Vovansk, which is that city I told you about a second ago, that's this one, they could push down south along this axis right here, then to try to take Kupiansk from two sides. So that also remains to be seen, and certainly is a possibility here. We just don't have enough information yet to know exactly what Russia's doing here, but there's lots of options for that to take place. So what is the situation in terms of the Ukraine side? Now, yesterday I showed you the video. I'm going to show you again in a second. Zelensky's first reaction was one of serious concerns. In fact, let me show you that one first. Here he was when he first announced yesterday that there had been an incursion.
Росія почала нову хвилю контрнаступальних дій на цьому напрямку. Україна зустріла їх там нашими військами, бригадами і артилерією. Важливо, що вони можуть збільшувати і підтягувати ще сили в цьому напрямку, це факт. Але наші військове командування знали про це і розраховували свої сили для того, щоб зустріти вогнем ворога. Зараз йде жорстокий бій в цьому напрямку. Артилерійським вогнем, з того, що мені відомо на сьому ранку, десь сьома ранку, ми зустріли вогнем.
Now, I don't know if the timing was coincidental or if this was already planned or if this was an intentional move by the United States to try and encourage and increase the confidence of Zelensky. But yesterday, the United States also announced a new $400 million tranche of weapons and ammunition that were going to Ukraine, which include many of the categories of things that he says he needs the most. And shortly after that, Zelensky appears to have gotten his confidence back a little bit. And also, I would point out that by the time he's making that announcement, he's probably already aware that many of his frontline units fled the battle and didn't even fight and had to be reinforced. Once the other reinforcements came up there and they at least solidified that initial incursion to 5 kilometers, and then Biden made this announcement here about the additional $400 million, he was a little bit more confident, and here's how he talked later.
The main topic is the Kharkiv region. Today, Russian troops tried to expand their operations against Ukraine. We understand the size of the occupiers' forces. We see their intentions. Today, we have a new decision on American support, President Biden's decision. It includes artillery, anti-tank weapons, vehicles, and air defense. This is exactly what we need. We are working on logistics to ensure that all the weapons prove their worth at the front as soon as possible.
Now, again, when we're trying to get into what is the intent of the Russian side, because Zelensky there in that clip says, we understand what they're doing. We know what they're doing. Now, he could be referring to what Vladimir Putin has said on March 19th, which really sounds like what's happening right now is a result of that. Here's what he said.
We will be forced at some point, when we deem it appropriate, to create a certain sanitary zone in the current territories under Kyiv's regime's control, to create a security zone that will be quite difficult to cross with the means of destruction that the enemy is using, primarily, of course, of foreign manufacture.
Now, that's so it seems if he says he wants to have this buffer zone, you know, because you've been given the orders if you're Zelensky, that you've been attacking Belgorod. So the fact that this incursion happened, one of the primary axes of entry happened directly south of Belgorod, pushing in the direction of Kharkiv that would move any artillery pieces further back that you have, that would seem to support that contention, that belief. That's what they're doing. But there's one thing, if anything I've learned from this war so far is that Russia, as they have done historically, has this I guess it's sort of a philosophy. It's called Maskarivka. I may be mispronouncing that, but it's something like that. Basically, is that it's military deception that Russia employs in all of its operations here. They do it at the tactical level, the operational level, and at the strategic level. Now, the initial invasion here was not much of that. In fact, they didn't have much deception at all. They wanted to just try and bully Ukraine into surrendering right away. That's in February of 2022 when they sent 4 axes of advance rolling into the country. They thought they would just surrender. But as I have told you before, it was a huge strategic error on the part of the Russians because they only had a plan A. And if you've been watching our channel and all, you know I complain about our side about only having plan A sometime. Well, Russia is also not immune to that issue, and they did in 2022 to where they had no plan B. If Ukraine fought and resisted, which they did, then they were screwed because now that it took them the better part of a year and a half to recover from that initial assumption Now, of course, they're in a much better position. But what we've learned since is that Russia is much more willing to use their traditional historical philosophies of not letting you know where they're going. So it seems unlikely to me, though I can't rule anything out, that Russia wouldn't just be as self-evident and doing what it appears that they're doing, and they didn't have something else up their sleeve. So we're going to kind of look at what else may happen. Now, here was an analysis by a British analyst earlier today on Sky News who talks about some of his concerns.
Although Russia's unlikely to be able to take Kharkiv, by attacking on a second front, it forces Ukraine, with its limited resources, to have to spread bet a little bit across the two, and that undoubtedly just makes life a little bit more difficult for Ukraine. The Donbass seems to be the focus of the special military operation. The key region around here, this sort of area here, is the bit that Ukraine is still trying to hold. Yeah. We're expecting to see Chavez Yar being one of the targets next, but it's a grinding war of attrition that Russia's doing. Ukraine seems to be trying to trade territory for time until the next batch of weapons come in, as while Russia but they're also, Ukraine's trying to make Russia pay a really high price for every meter of ground they take. I'm trying to sound positive, but the harsh reality is Russia has momentum, it has initiative, they're really important in warfare, and it's almost certainly going to be a very difficult few weeks for the Ukrainians.
And you know, the UK, especially Sky News, has been as pro-Ukraine as you can imagine, and the fact that he is now, you know, trying to be keeping it real for his audience really is quite telling, because he's saying, look, all the happy things that the Ukraine side has said and all these bold statements about how they stopped them, again, 5 kilometers across a 15-kilometer front in about 24 hours, with apparently only just a few battalions of forces. It should be alarming to the Ukraine side. So I can only imagine that behind the scenes right now, that Ukraine is moving even more troops up there. But here's the problem. This is what it exacerbates. Ukraine doesn't have a lot of troops to be moving around. Manpower, as I've told you over and over, is their number one shortfall. It's not, artillery pieces. It's not artillery ammunition, as important as that is. It's not even air defense, as important as that is. It's manpower. Even if the United States just said, you know what, there are no holds barred. We're literally going to give you any and everything that you ask for. Everything in our inventory is open to you. You can take it all. That's not going to change the fact on the ground, because it's the manpower issue. You can't have 500 tanks if you don't have 500 people, 500 tank crews that are able to operate it. You can't have several hundred more artillery pieces if you don't have people that are trained to man several hundred artillery tubes. You've got to have trained people. That takes numbers and it takes time. And when you're talking about now then where you have to shift like whole units from one part of the country to another, it's a zero-sum game. If you take them away from the Donbass front, then that which is already under pressure is going to become under more pressure. And it's possible that you pull the unit off here to push it up here, that the pressure that's already on breaks through whatever's there. And then where are you going to pull units from? I think that's the reason, or really could have been one of the reasons why Zelensky had that troubled look on his face and his body language is upset, because he understands better than any of us do that he's got limitations on trained units. Now, they're trying to mobilize people. They've just recently passed a mobilization bill. But as we've also shown you many videos over the months, they are having to physically grab people off the streets. They've got groups on all their borders with the Western states to try to grab people who is trying to escape, and their military age males leaving in droves. Many of them get caught and sent to limited training and then thrown into the front. And you can imagine that the fighting capability of someone who gets caught in there not going to be very high. And the fact that you saw these troops on the border area, many of them run at the first sight of Russian, is got to be an alarming trend for the Ukraine side. And all this, of course, goes back. The United States just announced this $400 million package. And of course, all this stuff, PR wise, it sounds good because they keep throwing stuff up like this. And, and they keep putting new rounds of like ammunition, interceptor missiles, all the things like Zelensky said that they need, they put it in there. What they don't tell you is the number of it. But as I told you, when this whole $61 billion package was first passed, the majority of that, the vast majority, is going to the United States, to our operations, to backfill the ammunition we've already sent. Only about 13 or 14 billion, and it could change plus or minus here and there, is a fraction of what's needed. So if instead of $400 million, which is part of that original package, if they just said the whole kit and caboodle, 14 billion, which would have been a massive one, it's still going to be just a fraction of what's needed at the front right now. And Russia continues to produce more and more weapons. And in fact, you had this Ukraine general here said that they will hold, he thinks, if they get the arms that it needs. And of course, that's a big question mark of how do you define what you need? Because that's the real issue here. But as I just said, and I don't know that he mentioned it here, but it's also number of trained troops. And so every time we keep talking to you about what's really happening on the ground, you keep coming back to the same inescapable conclusion. Ukraine doesn't have the resources. It doesn't have the manpower it needs to defend itself, to be able to maintain. One of the other questions that I had right off the top, how is it that in now rolling into deeper into the third year of war, Ukraine didn't have an elaborate defensive position in the northern part of their country, especially knowing that Russia's been massing troops up there for quite a long time now? Where is the defensive situation? You know, like the Russians had the Surovikin line, so-called, in 2023, that the Ukraine, they knew that Ukraine was coming on an offensive last year, so they began about 6 months ahead to build this elaborate system of defensive lines that were very well resourced, very well constructed. And of course, when the Ukraine offensive came, it just broke its teeth on there. One would have expected that, especially in an area where it was the most vulnerable, where you're right on the border with Russia, that there would be elaborate defenses up there that would be hard to penetrate. Listen, I used to be in the 2nd U.S. Cavalry, 2nd Armored Cavalry Regiment during the Cold War in Germany, patrolling the east and west border. And those border, I assure you, there was significant defensive positions on each side of it. And we always trained on what would happen if the Soviet Union came across it and how we would react and how we would fight, et cetera. So we had these mobile units, and of course there were physical barriers at the border. And one has to wonder, how could there not have been that there too? That is a big alarming issue. That a mere few battalions could roll in 5 kilometers into the border, it should be a really alarming, because that's something that you can control. You can have spent months building these elaborate, which would be extremely difficult for a large Russian force to break through. So that is the latest area of concern. Now, I saw some really bold defensive or bragging videos this morning from some of the Ukraine side from within Kharkiv city, and they're saying, who cares what's going on out there? We're so safe here. Nothing's going to happen to us here. We're defending. Well, here's the thing. At least as of now, Russia is not planning on taking Kharkiv city. That may come later. But even if all of those troops that are suspected there could be coming in, up to 70,000 troops, that's not a fraction of what would be needed to take Kharkiv city. I mean, just imagine to take the village of Avdiivka. It's a medium-sized town that Russia took earlier this year. They had around between 70 and 100,000 troops in that area to take that. The idea that a city of well over 1 million that you would take with the 70,000 troops is just nonsensical. They wouldn't. So that's not their objective. So it's clear that they're not going there, but it's also not clear yet where they are going. So I just wanted to leave you with that we still don't know. And I can't say with any confidence what the objective is of the Russian side, only that it's probably not what it appears, because Russia doesn't want the enemy to know what it's doing. So the initial movements have been concerning for the Ukraine side. The potential that it could draw resources away from some of the other fronts where they're already being driven back is very high, or that Russia could have more troops than we know about, and that could pop up in a different place. All that remains to be seen. The only thing I can tell you with any confidence right now is that you can count on Daniel Davis Deep Dive to keep you updated on all the things that are happening. And like this video here, I'm going to tell you the truth and the reality of it, not the spin that either side wants to hear, because I could care less about what either side wants to hear. All I care about is you getting the truth. And so we're going to give you our best military advice that we have and assessments based on the reality on the. You can count on that. And we count on you watching and liking and subscribing because that's one of the ways we can get our reach out further, so more people get a chance to get the truth that you're getting this morning. Thank you very much, and we will see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.